I do feel like the film would have been more interesting if Odysseus had just been a little bit more evil. Like, what a loss of aura points. The telephony is all kinds of fucked up, so I choose to ignore it. Why would a man be there? Why would a man be there? Cringe. Outdated theory alert. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. I'm trying out a new mic setup currently. It's already kind of annoying me, so I don't know if this is going to be a thing now, but yeah, I just wanted to try having my hands free for a video. So yeah, here we are. So I finally went to see the Odyssey the other day. I have many thoughts. This isn't going to be like a film review video because I'm not a film critic. I'm a book reviewer. I don't watch films. But I felt like I kind of had to see the Odyssey considering I am a classicist. And listen, as a classicist who specialises in contemporary receptions of classical mythology, I am so here for anything that is going to bring classics to the mainstream. Um, like, I so want more accessibility into classics and people thinking that classics isn't just for like the elite and the uber educated, you know? So, although I had quite a few issues with the film, and I'm sure I will find at least something to moan about over the course of this video, it's still cool that there is a big Odyssey film out there, definitely. And so that's kind of why I wanted to make this video for anyone who enjoyed the Odyssey, watched it, and wanted to know more about Greek mythology, wanted to read more about Greek mythology, but they're not sure where to start. As your resident Greek mythology enthusiast, I put together a little list. Actually, it's a long list of many books that I wanted to recommend to people who enjoyed the Odyssey and want to know more. Because classics is really cool, and I don't want to gatekeep it, and I want more people to learn about it. So here we are. So there are going to be a few kind of different sections in this video of different kinds of books I want to recommend. First, I wanted to recommend a few ancient sources for further reading after watching the film, you know, if you want to know what really happened in the mythology, etc. So, first we have the Odyssey. Obviously, this is my first recommendation. If you watch the film and want to know more about the story, the best thing is to go straight for the source material, right? Obviously, Emily Wilson's translation is the most popular option right now, being A, the first published translation into English by a woman, and B, Christopher Nolan's inspiration for the film. Right now, it's actually quite difficult to get hold of this translation in physical form because it is sold out everywhere, and secondhand copies are going for quite a lot. So you could wait it out until the hype dies down, or you get a different translation. I read Richmond Lattimore's translation when I was at school. This was before Emily Wilson's translation dropped. This was what I read when I lied on my CV and said I'd read the Iliad and the Odyssey. And then I ended up getting an interview at Oxford, and I was like, oh shit, I actually have to read these poems now. So I read this translation. I thought it was fine. There's nothing particularly special about it, but it does the job. There are a lot of other translations and editions available. Most of them will have a good kind of section of notes at the beginning. Some will have like little annotations, kind of footnotes and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, that is the Odyssey. And then if you want more information about the Trojan War itself, the next step is to go to the other Homeric poem. Emily Wilson also did a translation of the Iliad. This was quite a bit more recent. It was like a couple of years ago this was published. So the Iliad only covers a period of a few days in the ninth year of the war. So events leading up to and the start of the war are only given like offhand mentions, and there's nothing about the Trojan horse or the fall of Troy. Those are all subjects in other Homeric poems which have unfortunately all been lost to time. That's kind of, I feel like one of the biggest kind of misconceptions about the Iliad is that it is the Trojan War poem, but it is actually only one of the many Trojan War poems, and the only one that still survives, apart from the Odyssey, which technically isn't about the Trojan War at all, but about one guy's return home from the Trojan War. I think what I'm most excited about for people who've only seen the Odyssey and not consumed any other mythology content to experience is how much more of a wet wipe Agamemnon is in the actual mythology. Like, he's out there in the film just constantly aura farming, but if you read the Iliad, you will discover just how pathetic he actually is. Like, several times in this poem, he tries to test the men's willpower by suggesting giving up and going home, expecting them to like refuse out of duty and the quest for glory. But his men are so done with him and this 9 year long war that they actually take his suggestion seriously and agree to go home. They're like, okay, bet, let's go. Like, what a loss of aura points. It's great. It's so funny. And then he gets friggin' nerfed on the battlefield like halfway through the poem and spends half of it out of action in the medical bay. If you want more information about other stories from the Trojan cycle and related bits of mythology, a lot of what we still have comes from Greek tragedy. This is my anthology of not all of the Greek plays, but quite a few of them. This I had to shell out like £25 for at university, because it was like one of the required texts that we had to get, even though we literally studied 3 of the plays from here. Not all of them, literally 3. Like, yeah, that is university for you. Anyway, these Greek tragedies are significantly newer than the Homeric myths. We're talking like centuries newer, 300-ish BCE, part of the classical period. New enough to have been written down like kind of pretty close to exactly like how they originally were recited during the festivals. But a lot of them have survived, and a lot of them have become part of the general canon of Greek mythology. I'll just recommend a selection of individual plays that are related to the Trojan War, and I'm going to put this book down because it's actually quite heavy. So we have Sophocles' Ajax, which is about the death of Big Ajax. There were 2 Ajaxes who fought for the Greeks, and we call them Big Ajax and Little Ajax to differentiate, although neither of them were little. Like, Little Ajax was just kind of average, maybe on the larger side Ajax, and Big Ajax was just huge. So Big Ajax died after he was humiliated by Odysseus and driven mad by Athena, and he like fell on his own sword because he was just so embarrassed. Odysseus is a real villain in this one. It really exposes how he can be cunning for selfish means as well as for the good of his comrades, and that's really something I missed in the film. Like, I kind of get why Christopher wanted Odysseus to be like the moral guy, the guy who always tries to do the right thing, because like for mainstream audiences, if Odysseus had been written more morally grey, they would have called him unlikable and they probably would have criticized the film because of that, despite the fact that that is actually a more accurate representation of his character. But yeah, I do feel like the film would have been more interesting if Odysseus had just been a little bit more evil. You have Euripides, the Trojan women, which is about the fates of the women of the Trojan royal family immediately following the fall of Troy. We hate Odysseus in this one too. We really hate him. I actually can't remember if he like appears in person, but from what we know about him, from what is talked about him, we hate him. Euripides' Helen explores what we might call in modern internet lexicon an alternate universe or canon divergence in which Helen didn't go to Troy, or at least the real Helen didn't go to Troy, and instead Menelaus finds her held captive in Egypt. If you want to learn more about the House of Atreus saga, i.e. what happens to Agamemnon and his family upon his return, Greek tragedy is your friend. The Greek playwrights loved the House of Atreus. The blueprint of it all is Aeschylus's Oresteia, which tells the whole story of Agamemnon's return, murder, Orestes avenging his father, and then being pursued by Furies for doing so. For plays on Iphigenia, you have Iphigenia and Aulis and Iphigenia and Taurus, both by Euripides. Iphigenia is the daughter of Agamemnon, who is sacrificed for good winds in the film, although that is not the full story in the mythology, but you can find that out for yourself. And it also, like, again, goes to show kind of how pathetic Agamemnon is. For the aftermath of Agamemnon's death, you have versions of Electra by both Sophocles and Euripides, and you also have Orestes by Euripides, which is famous for the quote, I'll take care of you. It's rotten work, not to me, not if it's you. That is where that quote comes from. And all of those plays provide slightly different takes on what happened. Again, it's basically like a fan fiction, canon divergence slash alternate universe. Like, what if this happened? Now we're going to move briefly into the realm of Latin literature, which isn't quite Greek mythology, but the Romans liked to borrow aspects of religions from places they conquered, and they loved borrowing from the Greeks. We also have a lot more extant written work from the Romans, so a lot of what we know about Greek mythology is through Latin literature. Firstly, we have the Aeneid by Virgil, which is basically a spin off to the Trojan cycle about how Rome, or what would eventually become Rome, was founded by a prince of Troy who escaped the city when it fell. This is actually an important source for Sinon, who was never actually mentioned by Homer. He was named in a couple of other sources, but he's mainly known from a flashback scene in the Aeneid. And I will say that Nolan definitely bigged up his role in the film because he is kind of insignificant in all the source material. Like, he turns up in one scene and he also doesn't die straight away. So there's that. This is my edition that I have been using for well over 10 years now. As you can see, it has been well loved. It's a fairly controversial edition because it is a prose translation, but I personally think that it's a really good beginner-friendly translation because it just reads like your typical novel, and it also retains a lot of accuracy to the original Latin text because it's not constrained by line lengths or meter like verse translations are. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions though, and if you want something that reads more like the original poem, get a verse translation. There are lots of other translations available. I was actually told to get a different translation in verse for uni. Um, but I didn't actually end up reading it at uni in the end. I just like kept on using Old Reliable. I think if you held a gun to my head and asked me to say what my favorite epic poem was, I would probably say the Aeneid. Like, it is honestly like really good. It has a lot of like super political themes as well, because it was written during the reign of Augustus, and it's meant to be like propaganda for him as an emperor. But also Virgil was like super subversive and like kind of rebelling against him and his values as well. Um, so yeah, it is very cool. And finally, I just wanted to mention this one. I think the most beginner friendly ancient text for people who want to read ancient literature but don't know where to start is the Metamorphoses. This is a collection of short and snappy stories from Greco Roman mythology, all centered around the theme of transformation. The fact that they're short means they're really digestible and they don't require a massive amount of focus to read and understand. There are a lot of well known stories mixed in, including a kind of Spark Notes summarized version of the Trojan War towards the end. It's very easy to just kind of dip your toes in if you don't want to straight up commit to a Homeric epic right away. Now, here are some recommendations of more recent retellings of the Odyssey. First up, we obviously have to talk about Stephen Fry's Odyssey. This is really good for beginners because it is an accurate retelling of the mythology that doesn't change anything but is told in a really engaging way. It's good for if you're intimidated by the ancient material but you still want to know the full story of the Odyssey, the way that the mythology tells it, because you'll find that there are a lot of changes between the original source material and the film. And actually, I would just generally recommend all of Stephen Fry's myth retellings to beginners wanting to learn about Greek mythology, but who aren't sure where to start because they are so accessible and engaging while remaining pretty true to the original source material. Next up, we have one of my personal faves ever. This is The Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. This is a retelling of the Odyssey from the perspective of Penelope. The premise is she's in the underworld and she is telling a story from her own point of view. I really like this because Margaret Atwood does a great job of showcasing Odysseus's morally grey character. The film, as I said, does cut a lot of material from the mythology that leads us to question Odysseus's morals and consider that he's actually not a great guy. And there's a lot of material that does that in the Odyssey, like the poem. And this retelling kind of forces Odysseus to face one of the most terrible things he does in the whole poem, which is the slaughter of the maids, which is completely cut from the film. So if you've just seen the film, you probably won't know what I'm talking about. But if you have read the Odyssey or like consumed any other Odyssey related material, you will know. If you know, you know. And the maids play a kind of haunting Greek chorus role in this book, which I love. The film also cuts one of the best scenes in the entire poem, which is the bed scene, also at the end. And I was so mad about that because that scene displays Penelope's intelligence as well as Odysseus's, and it tells us just how well matched they are for each other. Ugh, I was so annoyed about that. But this book has the bed scene in it, and it was done so well in this book. Okay, next up we have Sweet Bitter Song by Rosie Hewlett. This is another retelling where Odysseus is morally less than stellar. In fact, he is very much cast as the villain in this book. This is a retelling of the Odyssey from the perspective of Melantho, aka Mia Goth's character, where she has this gorgeous, slow burn romance with Penelope. I thought this book had a fantastic discussion of power dynamics between man and woman, between free and enslaved. It handles the subject of slavery with a lot of nuance and tells us that Penelope's maids, which is what they're usually referred to as, but that is basically just a sanitized way of saying slave women, they really had no choice over what they did, and yet they still paid the price. I was disappointed, but very much not surprised to see Nolan's version of Melantho written to be as shallow and one-dimensional of compass to Antinous, because that is the way she is usually written. This book does a much better job of giving her justice, or at least like a three-dimensional character, you know. Speaking of Melantho, I do want to just quickly touch on Lies We Sing to the Sea, because this isn't a retelling per se, but it's more of a fantasy sequel to the Odyssey, and Melantho plays quite a large role in the plot of this book. And it's really good, and it's also sapphic. Obviously, I have to mention Circe. Controversial opinion, but I thought this book was just fine. Like, I struggled to get into it because the pacing is so slow throughout, but like, I have to include this book if we're talking about Odyssey retellings because it is one of the big ones. It's obviously a retelling of the life of Circe. I actually didn't hate what Nolan did with Circe in the film, but it is not accurate to how she is in the mythology at all. She is canonically the daughter of Titan, so she's immortal, who taught witchcraft to her niece Medea. Yes, that Medea. And she seduces Odysseus and keeps him on her island for a whole year and has a child with him. And that child later actually ends up killing him and marrying Penelope, but the telegony is all kinds of fucked up, so I choose to ignore it. Anyway, I think Madeline Miller also does a pretty good job of writing a morally grey, complex Odysseus, so that is a plus for this book. I just thought it was really, really slow paced, so it just wasn't really for me, and I personally prefer the Song of Achilles. And finally, we have A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes. This book, again, isn't an Odyssey retelling per se, but there is Odyssey content in there. This is a retelling of the Trojan cycle from the perspectives of all the women involved, from the well known ones to the very obscure ones. And my favourite parts of this book were the Penelope chapters. They're written as letters to Odysseus while he's still on his way home, and they clearly get more and more impatient as time goes on. It is so funny. And I also want to mention some retellings of myths that aren't strictly Odyssey themed, but if you want to read around the subject or you're interested by the stories that are kind of mentioned in passing in the film, like the House of Atreus, I still want to recommend it. So, firstly, we have The Daughters of Sparta by Claire Hayward. This is a retelling of the lives of Helen and Clytemnestra, mostly about their childhood and the events leading up to the war. Actually, the war itself and its aftermath take up very little space in the book, which is my main criticism of it because it makes the pacing feel very weird. But if you're interested about Helen and Clytemnestra's backstories, especially to do with the House of Atreus saga, give this a read. Next up, I've got Electra by Jennifer Saint. Similarly, this book also covers the House of Atreus, specifically following the first two plays of the Oresteia, I think, but it follows the perspectives of Clytemnestra, Electra, who is another daughter of Agamemnon, by the way. I don't think I ever mentioned, but she is discussed in a lot of plays. And Cassandra as well makes an appearance. And speaking of Cassandra, I also have Cassandra, the book by Crystal Wolfe. This is a fantastic retelling of Cassandra's life and her experience during the Trojan War. It's not really related to the Odyssey, but I put it in because it is set while Cassandra is being led to Agamemnon's palace, where she knows she's about to be murdered, and her life is basically flashing before her eyes. It's very disjointed and non-chronological, which adds to the whole idea of her being like plagued by prophecy to the point of insanity. And yeah, it is just such a great take on the Trojan War. It is quite slow paced and quite dense. And there are also like no chapters. So it's just like 200 pages of like text. And there are like line breaks and stuff, but you will want to like clear out your schedule for the day to read this. And next up, we have the Silence of the Girls trilogy. This isn't the go-to for a lot of people when talking about Greek myth retellings. So the first book, Silence of the Girls, covers the Trojan War from the perspective of Briseis, who is an enslaved woman in the Greek camp. The second book covers the immediate aftermath. This is called The Women of Troy. It covers the immediate aftermath of the war, again from Briseis' point of view. And the third, it's called The Voyage Home. It's about the voyage home, but the perspective jumps, I think, to Cassandra. I will say that I haven't read the third book, and I actually didn't like the other two books all that much, but I think that was because I went in expecting something different to what it actually was, and so I just ended up disappointed. So I will warn you, so you don't make the same mistake. These books aren't feminist retellings. There is nothing feminist about them. There's no kind of reclaiming of women's voices or agencies. You also get random additions of men's POVs in there as well. Like in the first book, you occasionally get Achilles' POV. The second book, you get Pyrrhus's POV. And I'm like, why would a man be there? Why would a man be there? But I think if you were to go in not expecting the retelling to be feminist, you might enjoy them because they do have some good takes on the horrors of war and the effects of war, particularly on people with minimal power, like women and enslaved people. So, yeah, just because I didn't like them doesn't mean that you're not going to like them either. You might enjoy them. Or not enjoy it because the books are depressing, but you might appreciate them. And finally, since we're on the subject of Trojan War retellings, I have to include my favourite Trojan War retelling ever, which is The End Council by B. Fitzgerald. This is a sapphic reimagining of the Trojan War, which includes a slow burn enemies lovers romance between Helen and Cassandra as they try to prevent the destined fall of the city. Guys, it's so good. It's a 10 out of 10 premise and a 10 out of 10 execution. It is so good, guys. It's amazing. Okay, now for the non-fiction recommendations for people who want to learn more about the history or about the characters in the Odyssey and in Greek mythology in general. So, first up we have Mythica by Emily Hauser. This book is so good. It is so good. If you want to know more about what life would have really been like in the time of the Odyssey, this book combines analysis of literature with cutting edge archaeological research to uncover the lives of women, but also just real lives in general who lived in the Bronze Age. Every chapter is inspired by a woman from the Homeric poems and focuses on a different aspect of women's lives. So there's a chapter on weaving, there's a chapter on female warriors, there's a chapter that debunks the theory of the Sea Peoples, bringing about the collapse of the Bronze Age, and maybe Nolan should have read this book for research because the constant mentioning of the people from the sea was cringe. Outdated theory alert. There's even a chapter on the fact that Homer's Ithaca isn't where we think it is, and the real island that is now called Ithaca doesn't match the mythological descriptions of the island at all. So there was a hunt for where the actual Ithaca was, kind of like Atlantis. It is so interesting, and I would implore anyone interested in ancient history or mythology to give this a read, because it's so good. And next up, we have Pandora's Jar and Divine Might by Natalie Haynes. These books discuss depictions of mythological women throughout history, from the ancient texts through Renaissance art, all the way through to depictions in modern day films like Hercules. Pandora's Jar is about the mortal women of mythology, while Divine Might is about the goddesses. As a classical receptionist, I found these books so interesting. How these women have fascinated us for millennia and how our perceptions of them have changed over the centuries. So sometimes how we see them now is nothing like how they originally were in the mythology. They're also written in a really engaging and entertaining way, which actually made me laugh a couple of times. I mean, it's Natalie Haynes, who is a comedian and has a whole podcast about mythology, so of course these books are funny and engaging. Then we have Heroes or Zeros by Lizzie Tiffin. This kind of straddles the line between retelling and nonfiction, but I will personally be using it as a reference text in the future, so that is how I'm categorizing it. Basically, this is a whistle-stop tour of over 100 men from classical mythology that tells you the main stories about them, and And these men range from the ones everyone knows, like Heracles and Achilles, to even ones that I was unfamiliar with, hence why I will be using it as a reference text. The book also uses the Odyssey as kind of an overarching storyline, as every so often you will get another little chapter of the story in relative chronological order. So while I wouldn't say it is an Odyssey retelling per se, it is definitely kind of a significant aspect of it. It's very informative while also being entertaining, so it's perfect for beginners who want to learn more about mythology as well as experts who want to brush up their knowledge. Okay, and finally, let's talk about a few books that I have not read yet, but I still think are worth mentioning. So, first up on my TBR, we have, of course, Crossing the Wine Dark Sea by Emily Wilson. This is Emily Wilson's new book on classical reception, and the questions that she has to answer as a translator, like how much do you want to change to make the text more accessible to a modern day audience? And does changing that text lose anything? Is it worth the sacrifice of losing stuff, losing the accuracy? Again, I specialize in classical reception at uni, so this is a must read for me, and I am very interested in reading a full non-fiction book by Emily Wilson. Next up, we have the Songs of Penelope trilogy. I only have the first book, and I haven't read it yet, and I got it years ago, so it's been on my TBR for a while. Um, but they are another obvious pick when someone mentions Odyssey retellings. Again, the series is a retelling of the Odyssey from the perspective of Penelope. I'm assuming it's just about like what she and the other women of Ithaca got up to while Odysseus was away and stuff. And then we have Bad Girls of Ancient Greece by Lizzie Tiffin. This is the companion book to Heroes or Zeros that focuses on the women of Greek mythology. I imagine it will be just as engaging and informative as Heroes or Zeros, so I'm looking forward to reading it. And then we have The Mighty Dead, Why Homer Matters by Adam Nicholson. I got this book ages ago and I still haven't read it. Will I get round to it eventually? Debatable. But this is a book about why the stories and themes in the Homeric poems still resonate with us today and why these stories and mythology are so timeless. Again, as a classical receptionist, I should eat this up, but you know what puts me off? The tiny font size. Like, look at that. I will need a magnifying glass to read that. It's ridiculous. And finally, we have the icon that is Mary Beard with her new book on classical reception. This book investigates influences of ancient history, mythology, and culture on modern day pop culture. From the reviews I've seen, the book sounds very beginner friendly. It potentially might be a little surface level for my own taste, but I'm still planning on reading it. And it's, again, probably a good read for people who are new to classics and reception studies. I am just loving the attention that reception studies is getting recently over the last few years. Like, I'm loving this kind of recognition of my specialist subject. It's great. And those are all the books. Um, there are a lot of them, which could potentially seem a little bit intimidating for people who are new to the genre, new to mythology, but yeah, I would definitely say start with Stephen Fry and just go from there. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok and Storygraph. My username on all those platforms is @widthofjones, which is the same as it is on here. I definitely want to do more videos like this, kind of myth-related recommendations and just talking about all these books and stories that I really like. So yeah, if you have any more suggestions for videos you want to see about mythology, please let me know. Because yeah, I want to make more stuff like this rather than just me talking about books that I've read recently, which I also really love doing, but they are long videos which take a lot of time for me to edit. So this is nice that I can just kind of bash out in one sitting. So yeah, I think that's it, I guess. I need to go and put all of these books away. They're sitting in quite intimidating piles in front of me, which might be why the lighting has changed. I don't know if the lighting has changed, but if the lighting has changed over the course of this video, that is why, because they're just casting a shadow. And I need to go and put them away. So I'm going to do that. Thanks so much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!